I started off my week by running errands around town. My stops included picking up spare tubes, replacing my debit card, and getting food for the day. After returning to the house, I had a lot of fun cooking a real meal. I got a little overzealous and cooked too much, but it was okay. I finished up the day, excited to be pushing on to new states. I left a bit late on Tuesday and was able to use the bike lanes to get out of the city. There were a few hills to contend with, but nothing too major. It was a long 80 miles to Mobile, Alabama, but thankfully most of it was on Route 98, which had a large shoulder. Traffic picked up once I got to the outskirts of the city. I did have to cross one very tall bridge, which did get my heart rate up. After that, I slowly maneuvered my way through the city. Because I had waited to try and miss some of the traffic, I didn't get in until after dark. I was very grateful to have a host for that evening. Their little puppy, Jack, even kept me company for much of the night. The next morning, I navigated my way out of Mobile before getting out to 15 or so miles of country roads. It was a nice stretch after both Pensacola and Mobile, and before I got back onto 90 West. The highway brought me into Mississippi, where roads became spotty at times, but all in all, the ride on 90 passed smoothly enough. The wide shoulder disappeared once I got out on the coast. After a few miles of contending with the busy road, I got wise and crossed over to the beach boardwalk. I was able to ride down the coast for a surprising 20-plus mile stretch that took me all the way to my destination of Passing Christian, Mississippi. I got up on Thursday, excited to be getting to New Orleans, where I plan on taking a day off to check out the city. I took 90 West, which brought me into Louisiana and through the Bayou Savage National Wildlife Refuge. With under 70 miles that day, I reached the Auberg Hostel by early afternoon. After dropping off my bags, I rode out to the Audubon Park and checked out the Tree of Life. I stayed in the park for a couple hours before grabbing dinner and heading back to the hostel. I set out on Friday to explore the city with a fellow traveler from the hostel. She was visiting from Germany, and with no plan on my own, I was super excited to have the company. We got our bikes and meandered about the city, stopping at places like the famous Café du Monde for the beignets, and one of New Orleans' above-ground cemeteries. We eventually found our way north to the St. John River, where the Bayou Boogaloo Music Festival was kicking off. We walked from one stage to another, checking out the various bands, as well as trying out the po' boys and watching the festival goers on the river. We stayed till the end and finished the day with a midnight ride through the somewhat surprisingly quiet city back to the hostel. I got a late start on Saturday. It was especially difficult to get back on the road after having had such a fun time exploring the city with my friend from Germany. But Memphis was calling, and after using the bike lanes out of the city, I backtracked for 30 or so miles back through the bayou until I got off Route 90 and headed north. The crosswind that I had been battling suddenly became a tailwind, and I made great time cruising up the highway. I made it to my destination of Bogalusa, Louisiana, and while grabbing dinner, a couple locals struck up a conversation, and one of them, an off-duty firefighter, recommended that I check out the nearby firehouse as a place to stay. The on-duty firefighters were super kind and happy to let me camp out for the night, even allowing me to use the station's showers. After saying my goodbyes to the firefighters, I got an early start out of Bogalusa in an attempt to get as far as I could before the oncoming storm hit. 15 miles in, the first drops began to fall. It was only the front of the storm, and the rain wasn't that bad. I was out on the highway with another 20 miles to the nearest town, so I picked up my pace. A few miles outside of Columbia, Mississippi, the rain picked up significantly, and I raced into town, stopping to grab lunch and wait out the rain. After a couple of hours, the storm passed, and I got back on the road for the last 35 miles. Much of the last stretch were quiet country roads that I had mostly to myself. After a few hours of riding, I made it to Monticello, Mississippi. I was able to shack up for the night in an empty announcer's box next to the highway, where I set to planning out my path to Memphis and the week ahead, before turning in early after a long day on the road.